When Shaquille O'Neal, one of the most famous basketball players who ever lived, put on a pair of fake glasses, squeezed into a tight brown sweater, and walked into a small elementary school in Newark, New Jersey, pretending to be a substitute teacher named Mr. Harrison, he thought the hardest part would be making sure nobody recognized him. He was wrong, because within 5 minutes of stepping through those doors, the principal of that school looked him up and down like he was dirt on her floor. She didn't say hello. She didn't say welcome. She crossed her arms, told him he was late, and said, "Follow me, and try to keep up." And that was just the beginning. Over the next 5 days, Shaq watched this woman do things that made his blood boil, and he watched her throw a grandmother's homemade cookies straight into the trash, right in front of her. He watched her call the janitor who had worked there for 19 years, the cleaning guy, without ever using his real name. He watched her destroy a young teacher's entire career behind her back. And he watched her call a 10-year-old boy lazy in front of his whole class. A boy who fell asleep at his desk because he was living in a homeless shelter and hadn't eaten a real dinner in days. She did all of this because she thought nobody important was watching. She had no idea that the tall, quiet substitute teacher standing in the hallway, the one she insulted, the one she dismissed, the one she treated like he was nothing, was actually a 4-time NBA champion with a doctorate in education, hidden cameras in his sweater, and a plan that was about to turn her entire world upside down. But here's the part nobody expected. Not the TV producers, not the camera crew, not even Shaq himself. Because during that week, a quiet boy in the third row left his notebook on his desk. And when Shaq opened it, he found something hidden inside the back cover. A secret so heartbreaking that it brought a 7'1", 300-pound man to tears in an empty classroom. What was in that notebook changed everything. It changed the show, it changed the plan, and it changed Shaq's life forever. You need to watch this whole video to find out what happened. Because by the end of this story, a principal will lose her job, a grandmother will start a business, a young teacher will get the career she was robbed of, and a 10-year-old boy will stand in a museum in front of a painting that will make you cry harder than any movie you have ever seen. This is the story of the biggest mistake a principal ever made. And it all started on a cold Monday morning in January 2024, when a man who stood 7 feet 1 inch tall walked into Meadowbrook Elementary School in Newark, New Jersey. He wore thick glasses with black frames. He had on a plain brown sweater that was too tight around his massive shoulders. His name tag read Mr. Harrison. But this was no ordinary substitute teacher. On a cold Monday morning in January 2024, a man who stood 7 feet 1 inch tall walked into Meadowbrook Elementary School in Newark, New Jersey. He wore thick glasses with black frames. He had on a plain brown sweater that was too tight around his massive shoulders. And his name tag read Mr. Harrison. But this was no ordinary substitute teacher. This was Shaquille O'Neal, the 4-time NBA champion. The man who had dunked basketballs so hard he broke the backboard. Not once, but twice. The man who had earned his doctoral degree in education from Barry University in 2012. Yes, Shaq, Dr. Shaquille O'Neal, actually holds a real Ed.D. He has always said that education matters more than any championship ring. So why was one of the most famous athletes on the planet pretending to be a substitute teacher named Mr. Harrison in a small school in Newark? It started 3 weeks earlier. Shaq had been filming a segment for a new show. The idea was simple. He would go undercover in everyday jobs to see how people really treat each other when they think nobody important is watching. And he had already gone undercover as a pizza delivery driver. He had pretended to be a car mechanic, but this one was personal. Shaq had grown up in Newark. He was born on March 6, 1972, at the Newark Beth Israel Medical Center. His mother, Lucille O'Neill, had raised him in tough neighborhoods. He remembered what it felt like to be a kid who people looked down on. He remembered teachers who believed in him and teachers who did not. His old Army Sergeant stepfather, Philip Harrison, had been strict but loving. That's where the fake name came from. Mr. Harrison, a tribute to the man who shaped him. The makeup team had done their best. They gave him the glasses. They padded his sweater to make his frame look less athletic and more like a really, really tall guy who just happened to be big. They even added a slight limp to his walk. Oh, a fake story about a bad knee from a car accident. He carried a worn leather bag with lesson plans inside. Real lesson plans. Because Shaq had actually studied for this. With his doctorate in education, he didn't just want to pretend, he wanted to teach. The camera crew was hidden. Tiny cameras sat in the buttons of his sweater. A van parked outside the school had monitors and producers watching every second. Shaq took a deep breath and pushed through the front doors. The hallway smelled like floor cleaner and crayons. Kids ran past him, their sneakers squeaking on the tile. A few of them looked up, way, way up, and their eyes went wide. But none of them recognized him. To them, he was just a giant man who looked a little funny in his tight sweater. Then a voice cut through the hallway noise like a blade. "Gee, you must be the sub." Shaq turned around. Standing there with her arms crossed and a clipboard pressed against her chest was a woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes. Her name was Principal Dolores Whitfield. She looked him up and down the way someone looks at a stain on their carpet. She did not smile. She did not say, "Welcome." She said, "You're late. Follow me," and try to keep up. Shaq had faced defenders in the NBA Finals. He had gone toe-to-toe with Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, and Yao Ming. But something about the way this woman spoke to him made his stomach tighten. He had no idea what was coming next. Principal Whitfield walked fast. Her heels clicked on the hard floor like a ticking clock. She didn't look back to see if Shaq was following. She just expected him to keep up. "The class is 4th grade," she said without turning around. 26 kids. Half of them don't listen. The other half don't care. The regular teacher, Mrs. Amalia Vega, is out for surgery. She'll be gone 6 weeks. You're her replacement." Shaq nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I've prepared lesson plans for—" "I don't need to hear your lesson plans." Principal Whitfield stopped so suddenly that Shaq nearly bumped into her. She spun around and looked up at him, way up. Her neck tilted back like she was staring at a skyscraper. But her eyes didn't show any amazement. They showed annoyance, like his height was just another problem she had to deal with today. "Let me make something clear, Mr. Harrison. Substitutes come and go. Most of them can't handle this school. Most of them quit by Wednesday. I don't have time to babysit a sub who doesn't know what he's doing." Shaq felt the heat rise in his chest. His hands tightened around the strap of his leather bag. But he kept his voice calm, steady, the way Philip Harrison had taught him. When someone pushes you, you don't push back with anger. You push back with patience. "I understand," Shaq said. "Do you have any actual teaching experience?" she asked. Her eyes scanned him again, top to bottom, like she was measuring him and finding him short, which, for a man his size, would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. "I have a doctorate in education," Shaq said quietly. Principal Whitfield let out a short laugh. Not a warm one, not the kind that invites you in, the kind that shuts you out. "A doctorate. Sure, everyone's got a degree these days. So it doesn't mean you can handle a room full of 10-year-olds in Newark." She turned on her heel and kept walking. Shaq followed her down the hallway, past bulletin boards covered in student artwork, past a water fountain that dripped steadily onto the floor, past a row of lockers painted bright blue, half of them dented. The school was old. You could feel its age in the creak of the floors and the flicker of the overhead lights. But someone had tried to make it cheerful. Paper butterflies hung from the ceiling. Handprints in every color lined the walls near the kindergarten rooms. Someone here cared. Just not the woman walking in front of him. They stopped in front of room 14B. The door had a construction paper rainbow taped to it. Underneath, in a child's careful handwriting, it said, "Mrs. Vega's Stars." Each letter was a different color. Someone had drawn little yellow stars around the words. It was the kind of thing a teacher makes with love, and a child helps with pride. "Good luck," Principal Whitfield said. She didn't mean it. The words came out flat, empty, like a glass with nothing inside. She walked away without looking back. Her heels clicked down the hallway and faded into silence. Shaq stood there for a moment, just him and the rainbow door. He thought about Lucille, his mother. She had worked as an aide in schools when Shaq was young. She had told him stories late at night. Stories about how some people in power treat the workers below them, like they're invisible, like they don't have feelings, like they don't matter. "Baby," Lucille used to say, You can always tell who a person really is by how they treat people who can't do anything for them." Shaq touched the paper rainbow on the door. One corner was peeling off. He pressed it back down gently with his massive thumb. Then he pushed open the door. 26 faces stared at him. Some mouths dropped open. A few kids leaned sideways to whisper to each other. One girl in the middle row covered her mouth with both hands. A boy near the window pressed his face against the glass like he was thinking about escaping. But one boy in the front row, small, with big brown eyes and a faded Spider-Man backpack hanging off his chair, looked up at Shaq and whispered, "Are you a giant?" The class erupted in giggles. Nervous, excited, wonderful giggles. The sound of children who had just seen something they couldn't explain. So Shaq smiled for the first time that morning. A real smile. The kind that starts deep in your chest and climbs all the way up to your eyes. "Something like that," he said. "My name is Mr. Harrison, and I'm going to be your teacher for a while." He set his leather bag on Mrs. Vega's desk. He looked around the room. There were drawings pinned to every wall, math worksheets stacked in trays, a small bookshelf in the corner overflowing with chapter books, a poster above the whiteboard that said, "You belong here." Shaq believed that. He believed every kid in this room belonged here. He just wasn't sure the principal felt the same way. A girl in the back row with 2 long braids and bright, curious eyes raised her hand. Her name, he would learn, was Yemisi Adeyemi. She was from a Nigerian family that had moved to Newark 2 years ago. And her father drove a taxi. Her mother was studying for her nursing certification at night. Yemisi spoke 3 languages and read 2 grade levels above her age. "Mr. Harrison?" she asked. Her voice was clear and unafraid. "Yes? Are you going to leave like the last substitute?" The room went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that happens when a teacher says, "Shh." The kind of quiet that happens when every child in the room is holding the same question inside their chest. The kind of quiet that means this matters. Shaq looked at Yemisi. He saw something in her eyes he recognized. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was something deeper, something heavier. It was the look of a kid who had been disappointed by adults too many times. The look of a kid who had learned that when grown-ups say, "I'll be here," they usually aren't. And he had seen that look in the mirror when he was 10 years old. "No," he said. His voice was low and steady. "I'm not going anywhere." He meant it, every word, every letter. But he didn't know yet what keeping that promise would cost him. And he didn't know that in 3 days, something hidden inside a child's notebook would change his life forever. Over the next 3 days, Shaq taught the class as Mr. Harrison. And something magical happened inside room 14B. On Tuesday, he taught them fractions using pizza slices. Real ones. He had ordered 6 large pepperoni pizzas from Star Tavern on Market Street, one of the oldest pizza spots in Newark. The kids screamed when he walked in carrying the boxes stacked up past his chin. "If I eat 3 slices out of 8, Shaq said, holding up a slice the size of his hand, "what fraction of the pizza is left?" Every hand in the room shot up, even Deshaun Morley's, the quiet boy in the 3rd row, the one who never raised his hand, the one who wore the same gray hoodie every single day. Even Deshaun wanted to answer. That was the first time Shaq noticed him. Really noticed him. On Wednesday, he read them chapters from Bridge to Terabithia by Catherine Patterson. He did all the character voices. He made Leslie sound brave and curious. He made Jess sound shy and hopeful. When he got to the sad part, the part every kid remembers, he watched their faces change. Yamisi pressed her hands together under her chin. A boy named Marcus wiped his eyes with his sleeve and pretended he had allergies. Deshaun stared at the floor and didn't blink. On Thursday, he played classical music during quiet work time. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. He told them that studies show music helps the brain focus. The room went still, pencils scratched on paper. For 20 minutes, room 14B was the most peaceful place in Newark. The children loved him, but Principal Dolores Whitfield did not. Every single day, she found a reason to come into room 14B and tear something apart. On Tuesday, she stood in the doorway and watched the pizza lesson for exactly 90 seconds. Then she said, loud enough for every child to hear, "Mr. Harrison, this classroom smells like a restaurant. This is a school, not a pizzeria." She made him throw the leftover pizza away. 3 kids hadn't gotten their slices yet. Shaq saw their faces fall. He said nothing, but inside, something cracked. On Wednesday, she told him the reading lesson was a waste of instructional time. She said, "The state test doesn't measure how well you do voices, Mr. Harrison. It measures reading comprehension scores. Focus on what matters." On Thursday, she walked in during the classical music. She stood there for 10 minutes without saying a word, just watching. Arms crossed, clipboard against her chest like a shield. Then she turned and left. She didn't say a single thing. And somehow, that was worse than the insults. Because silence from a person with power isn't just silence. It's a message. The message is, "I'm watching you, and I'm waiting for you to fail." But it wasn't just Shaq she treated this way. And that's what broke his heart. He started noticing things, small moments, the kind most people walk right past without seeing. But Shaq saw them. But because when you grow up the way he grew up, moving from base to base with a military stepfather, always being the new kid, always being the biggest person in every room, you learn to watch. You learn to read people. You learn to see who's hurting. He noticed the janitor first. His name was Teodoro Ruiz, but everyone called him Teo. He was 57 years old. He had worked at Meadowbrook Elementary for 19 years. 19 years of mopping floors, fixing leaky faucets, unclogging toilets, replacing ceiling tiles, setting up chairs for assemblies, and cleaning up after every event, every spill, every child who got sick in the hallway. 19 years, and Principal Whitfield called him the cleaning guy. Not Teo, not Mr. Ruiz, not even Teodoro. The cleaning guy. One afternoon, Shaq watched Teo mopping the hallway outside the front office. He moved the mop in slow, careful strokes. The floor gleamed behind him like glass. Then, Principal Whitfield came out of her office, talking on her phone. She walked straight through the wet floor. Her heels left tracks across the surface Teo had just cleaned. She didn't look at him. She didn't say, "Excuse me." She didn't even break stride. Teo stood there. He looked down at the heel marks on his clean floor. He let out a small breath. Not a sigh. Something quieter than that. Something that sounded like a man who had stopped being surprised a long time ago. Then he dipped his mop back in the bucket and started over. Shaq watched from the end of the hallway. His jaw tightened. Then there was Bernice. Bernice Calloway was 64 years old. She was a grandmother of 5. She volunteered as a lunch aide at Meadowbrook 3 days a week. She didn't get paid. She showed up because she loved the kids. Every Wednesday, she baked homemade cookies, oatmeal raisin, and chocolate chip, and brought them to the teacher's lounge in a tin covered with a dish towel. The teachers loved Bernice's cookies. They were the best part of Wednesday. But this Wednesday, Principal Whitfield walked into the lounge, saw the tin, and picked it up. "Who brought these?" she asked. "I did," Bernice said with a proud smile. "Baked fresh this morning. My grandmother's recipe. 100 years old." Principal Whitfield turned the tin over in her hands. Then she walked to the trash can, opened the lid, and dumped the entire tin, cookies, dish towel, and all, into the garbage. "This is a health code issue," she said. "Homemade food is not permitted in the staff lounge." Bernice's smile collapsed. It didn't fade. It collapsed, like a building falling in on itself. Her hands, still dusted with flour from that morning, dropped to her sides. She whispered, "I've been bringing those cookies for 3 years." "Then it's been a health code violation for 3 years," Principal Whitfield said. She walked out. Bernice stood in front of the trash can for a long time. She didn't cry. That's what hit Shaq the hardest. She didn't cry because people who get hurt enough times stop crying. They just go still, like Teo and his mop. And then there was Priya. Priya Chakraborty was 26 years old. She was a teaching assistant at Meadowbrook. She had been working toward her full teaching certification for 3 years. She worked long hours. She stayed late. While she tutored kids during her lunch break, she graded papers on the bus ride home to her apartment in East Orange. One afternoon, Shaq was in the hallway when he overheard Priya knock on Principal Whitfield's office door. "Principal Whitfield, I was wondering, would you be willing to write a letter of recommendation for my certification application? The deadline is next month." There was a pause. Then Whitfield's voice came through the half-open door, sharp as a paper cut. "A letter of recommendation? For what, Priya? Maybe when you've actually accomplished something worth recommending." The door closed. Priya stood in the hallway. Her folder, full of 3 years of evaluations, lesson plans, and student feedback, hung at her side. Her chin trembled, but she straightened her back, turned, and walked away. And she passed Shaq without seeing him. He saw her, though. He saw all of them, and the hidden cameras caught every single moment. But here's the thing nobody expected. Not the producers, not the camera crew, not the network. Shaq wasn't just gathering footage for a television show anymore. Something had shifted inside him. Something deep and permanent. Like a bone that breaks and heals at a different angle. These people, Teo, Bernice, Priya, the kids, they were real. Their pain was real. Their lives didn't pause when the cameras stopped rolling. They would still be here next week, next month, next year. And a TV reveal wasn't going to fix that. On Thursday evening, Shaq sat in the production van parked on the street outside Meadowbrook. The van was crammed with monitors, cables, headphones, and empty coffee cups. The lead producer, a man named Garrett Holloway, was leaning forward in his chair with his eyes glowing from the screen. "This is gold, Shaq. Absolute gold," Garrett said, rubbing his hands together. "The principal is a nightmare. The audience is going to eat this up. The reveal is going to be massive." Shaq didn't answer. He was staring at the monitors. On one screen, he watched footage of Yemesi raising her hand in class, her eyes bright with a thought she couldn't wait to share. On another, he watched Teo carefully placing a small glass jar of fresh flowers on the windowsill near the front entrance. Flowers he had bought with his own money from a bodega on South Orange Avenue. On the third screen, he watched Bernice's face at the exact moment her cookies hit the trash. That moment played on a loop. Over and over. The smile, the collapse, the stillness. "I don't want to just reveal who I am and leave," Shaq said. Garrett looked up. His excitement dimmed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, these people need more than a TV moment, Garrett. They need someone to actually do something. Something real. Something that lasts longer than an episode." Garrett leaned back and shook his head slowly. "Shaq, look, I hear you. But that's not in the budget. The show is about the reveal. That's the format. That's what the network bought. Then I'll use my own money." The van went quiet. One of the sound engineers took off his headphones and stared. Garrett opened his mouth to argue, but something in Shaq's face stopped him. There was no smile there, no charm, no jokes. Just a man who had made a decision and wasn't going to change his mind. Because Shaq was already thinking about something bigger. Something he hadn't told anyone on the production team. A plan that was forming in his mind like one of Deshawn's drawings. Faint lines at first, then bolder strokes, then color, then something that looked like it could be real. And there was something else. Something about one of the students that had shaken Shaq to his very core. Something he had discovered that afternoon. Hidden inside a notebook that a child had accidentally left behind on his desk. He had picked it up. He had opened it. And what he found inside made him sit down at Mrs. Vega's desk and put his face in his hands. He wasn't ready to talk about it. Not yet. Not even to Garrett. Not even to his mother. But tomorrow, he would have to face the boy who owned that notebook. And nothing, not basketball, not fame, not money, not any championship ring, had prepared him for what that conversation would feel like. The notebook belonged to a boy named Deshawn Morley. He was the quiet kid in the third row. Second seat from the window. He never raised his hand, except that one time during the pizza lesson, and even then, he pulled it back down before Shaq could call on him. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never laughed loud like the other kids. He laughed small, a quick breath through his nose, a flicker at the corner of his mouth, like he had learned to keep his happiness quiet so nobody could take it from him. He wore the same gray hoodie every single day. It was 2 sizes too big. The sleeves hung past his hands, and he kept them balled up inside the fabric like he was hiding something. His sneakers had holes in the toes. Not small holes, The kind of holes that let the rain in. The kind of holes that mean a kid walks through puddles and feels them for the rest of the day. Deshaun had left his notebook on his desk when the class went to recess on Thursday afternoon. The other kids rushed out in a flood of noise and sneakers and laughter. But Deshaun's notebook sat there on the desk. A plain black composition book. The cover was soft from being handled so much. The corners were bent. A piece of duct tape held the spine together. Shaq picked it up to put it in Deshaun's cubby. That was all. Just a teacher putting away a student's belongings. But the notebook fell open in his hands. And what he saw stopped him cold. Inside were drawings. Not the kind of drawings you expect from a 10-year-old. Not stick figures. Not wobbly houses with triangle roofs and a circle sun. And these were real. These were extraordinary. A dragon made entirely of smoke and fire, every scale shaded with careful pencil strokes, the wings stretched wide like they were about to lift off the page. The detail was so precise that Shaq could see individual wisps of smoke curling from the dragon's nostrils. A portrait of a woman. She was crying and smiling at the same time. Her eyes were wet, but her lips were turned up. It was the kind of face that holds two feelings at once. The kind of face that says, "I'm not okay, but I'm still here." Shaq knew, without being told, that this was Deshaun's mother. A city skyline at night. Newark. Shaq recognized the Prudential Center in the background, the shape of the buildings along Broad Street. Every window in every building glowed a different color. Amber, blue, pale green, soft pink, like Deshaun had imagined that behind each window, someone was living a different kind of life. A warmer life, a safer life. The skill was remarkable. Not remarkable for a child, remarkable for anyone. The boy had a gift that most adults spend years in art school trying to develop. And he had it naturally, growing in the margins of a composition notebook held together with duct tape. But between the drawings were words, small words, written in shaky handwriting, squeezed between the artwork like secrets hiding in the spaces between breaths. "Mom is sick again." Shaq turned the page. "We ate cereal for dinner. No milk." He turned another page. "I don't want to go to the shelter again. I hate the smell. The man in the bed next to us coughs all night. Mom says it's temporary. She always says that." Another page, and another drawing, this one of a door. A tall, narrow door standing alone in the middle of an empty white page. No walls around it, no building attached to it, just a door. It had a golden handle and light pouring through the cracks around its edges, like something beautiful was waiting on the other side. And underneath the door, in Deshaun's small handwriting, "Sometimes I wish I could draw a door and walk through it to somewhere else." Shaq closed the notebook. He sat down at Mrs. Vega's desk. The chair groaned under his weight. The classroom was empty now. The only sound was the distant echo of kids shouting on the playground and the hum of the old heating system pushing warm air through the vents. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, tears rolled down Shaquille O'Neal's face. Not because the drawings were beautiful, and they were, but that's not why he cried. He cried because he knew this story. He had lived a version of it. He had been this boy. Growing up in Newark, there were nights when food was scarce in the O'Neal house. There were nights when Lucille made a meal out of nothing, rice and whatever was in the cabinet. There were times when his family moved from place to place, base to base, apartment to apartment. Before Philip Harrison came into their lives, there had been chaos. There had been fear. There had been nights when young Shaq lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, and wished he could be somewhere else. Somewhere where the man next door didn't shout. Somewhere where his mother didn't cry when she thought he was sleeping. Somewhere where being tall and big and different didn't make him a target. He had wished for a door, too. And basketball had been his door. The court was the place where his size became a gift instead of a burden. Where his power meant something. Where people finally looked at him and saw potential instead of a problem. But Deshaun didn't have basketball. Deshaun had a pencil and a composition book. And those drawings were his door. The only way out of a life that kept closing in on him. Shaq wiped his face with the back of his hand. He set the notebook gently on Deshaun's desk. He placed it exactly where the boy had left it, so Deshaun wouldn't know it had been moved. But he knew. He had seen inside. And you can't unsee something like that. After school, Shaq found Deshaun sitting alone on the front steps of Meadowbrook Elementary. The other kids had already been picked up by parents or loaded onto buses, but Deshaun was still there. In his backpack sat between his feet. His hoodie was pulled up over his head. He was drawing in his notebook, his pencil moving in fast, light strokes. He was waiting for a bus that was 20 minutes late. Shaq lowered himself down onto the step next to Deshaun. The concrete step was meant for children. It was not meant for a 7'1" man. His knees came up almost to his chest. The step creaked. Deshaun looked over, and for just a second, the tiniest flicker of a smile crossed his face. The way you might smile when a friendly bear sits down beside you. "Hey, Deshaun," Shaq said. "Hey, Mr. Harrison." They sat in silence for a moment. Cars passed on the street. A pigeon landed on the railing, looked at them, and flew away like it had somewhere more important to be. "I saw your drawings," Shaq said gently. "You left your notebook on your desk." Deshaun's pencil stopped moving. His body went rigid. The flicker of a smile disappeared like a candle blown out. "You read it?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I saw some of it. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. I was putting it in your cubby and it fell open." Deshaun grabbed his notebook and shoved it deep into his backpack. He zipped the backpack shut and pulled it against his chest like he was protecting something alive. "It's just stupid stuff," he said. His voice cracked on the word stupid. The way a voice cracks when the mouth says one thing and the heart says another. "It's not stupid," Shaq said softly. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Deshaun, listen to me. What I saw in that notebook, the dragon, the city, the portrait, that's not stupid. It's the most honest thing I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of things." Deshaun stared at the ground, at his broken sneakers, at the crack in the concrete between his feet where a single blade of grass was pushing through. "Are you going to tell the principal?" he asked. "No. Promise?" "Promise." Deshaun's shoulders relaxed, but only a little. "She already thinks I'm a problem kid." Shaq frowned. "Why does she think that?" "Because I fell asleep in class last month. During math, she came in and saw me. She said I was lazy. She said it in front of everyone. Then she called my mom. My mom had to leave work to come get me. She had to take the bus from downtown. It took her an hour. Her boss almost fired her." Deshaun said all of this in a flat voice. The voice of a child who has learned to tell painful stories without feeling them. Because feeling them every time would be too much. Shaq's jaw tightened. His hands that had palmed basketballs like oranges, hands that had shattered backboards, balled into fists on his knees. Not from anger at Deshaun, from anger at a world that punishes children for being tired. "Deshaun," Shaq said, "falling asleep in class doesn't make you lazy." "Then what does it make me?" Shaq turned to look at him. This small boy with the too big hoodie and the broken sneakers and the notebook full of doors. "It makes you tired," Shaq said. "And being tired is not your fault. Not ever. Do you hear me? It's not your fault." Deshaun didn't answer. He pulled the strings of his hoodie tighter around his face until only his eyes were showing. But those eyes, those big brown eyes, were shining. Not with tears, with something else. Something that looked like the beginning of believing. The bus finally came. It rumbled up to the curb with a hiss of brakes and a cloud of exhaust. Deshaun stood up, slung his backpack over one shoulder, and climbed the steps. He didn't look back. But as the bus pulled away from the curb, Shaq saw him through the window. Deshaun had pressed his hand flat against the glass. His fingers spread wide. It might have been a wave, or it might have been a boy reaching for that door he kept drawing. The one with light pouring through the cracks. The one that led somewhere else. Somewhere warm. Somewhere safe. Somewhere a kid could sleep without being called lazy, and draw without being called stupid, and eat dinner with milk in his cereal. Shaq watched the bus disappear down the street. He sat on that tiny step for a long time. And the sun was going down over Newark. The sky turned orange and pink above the rooftops. He pulled out his phone. He didn't call Garrett. He didn't call the production team. He called his mother. "Mom," he said. "Baby? What's wrong? You sound different." "I met a kid today, Mom, and I need to tell you about him." And then, something Lucille O'Neal had almost never heard in her son's adult life, Shaquille O'Neal broke down and cried on the phone. Deep, shaking sobs. The kind that come from a place so far down inside you that most people don't even know it exists. Because Deshaun's story wasn't just a story on a TV show. It was Shaq's story. Rewritten in a child's handwriting. Drawn in pencil on pages held together with tape. And he knew with every fiber of his 7'1" frame that he could not walk away from this boy. But what he didn't know yet was that tomorrow would be the day everything shattered. The day Principal Whitfield would go too far. The day a 10-year-old girl named Yemisi would stand up and say something so brave that it would echo through that school like thunder. And the day Shaq would finally decide that the script, the show, the format, the network, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was a promise he had made to a room full of children. "I'm not going anywhere." He intended to keep it. Friday, day 5. Shaq walked into Meadowbrook Elementary that morning with a basketball under one arm and a marble in his pocket. He had a plan for the science lesson. A good one. The kind of lesson that makes a kid remember something forever. He stood in front of the class and held up the basketball. "This," he said, "it is Jupiter." Then he pulled the marble from his pocket and held it up between his thumb and finger. "And this is Earth. This is us. This is where we live." 26 kids leaned forward. Marcus whispered, "No way." A girl named Soleil put her hands on her cheeks and stared. Deshaun's pencil stopped moving over his notebook. Even he was looking up. Shaq set Jupiter on the desk and placed Earth, the marble, right next to it. The difference was staggering. The basketball looked like a giant next to the tiny glass ball, which, of course, it was. "Jupiter is so big," Shaq said, "that you could fit over 1,300 Earths inside it." 1,300! Imagine this whole school. Now imagine 1,300 of them, all crammed inside one planet. "That's insane," Marcus said. "That's the solar system," Shaq said. "And we're going to learn every planet today. By the time we're done, you're going to know things about space that most grown-ups don't know." The kids were electric. Yemisi was already writing notes. A boy named Kendrick was sketching Saturn's rings. Deshaun was drawing Jupiter in his notebook, shading it with the brown and orange bands that swirl across its surface. His version was better than any textbook illustration Shaq had ever seen. For 35 minutes, Room 14B was the most alive classroom in New Jersey. Then Principal Whitfield walked in. She stood in the doorway with her clipboard. Her eyes moved from the basketball on the desk to the marble in Shaq's hand to the children who were practically vibrating with excitement. She watched for 3 minutes. She didn't say anything. She just watched, and the silence coming off her was cold. The kind of cold that makes you pull your jacket tighter even though you're indoors. Then she spoke. "Mr. Harrison." The room went still. "This isn't playtime. Put the props away and follow the textbook." Shaq kept his voice steady, professional, the way his doctorate had trained him to handle pushback. "The textbook doesn't have a model for scale comparison, Principal Whitfield. Research shows that hands-on learning improves retention by up to 75%. I can share the studies if you'd like." Her eyes narrowed. She took one step into the classroom. "I don't need a lecture from a substitute. I said, follow the textbook. Page 214, the Solar System chapter. Read it. Answer the questions at the end. That is the lesson." She turned to leave. And then something happened that nobody, not Shaq, not the hidden cameras, not the producers watching in the van, expected. Yemisi Adeyemi raised her hand. "Principal Whitfield?" Whitfield stopped in the doorway. She turned slowly, the way a storm cloud turns toward a town. "What?" Yemisi sat straight in her chair. Her 2 long braids hung over her shoulders. Her hands were folded on her desk. She was 10 years old. She weighed maybe 65 pounds, and she looked directly into the eyes of the most powerful person in the building. "Mr. Harrison is the best teacher we've ever had," Yemisi said. Her voice did not shake. "Please, don't make him stop teaching us this way." The room held its breath. 25 children froze. Even Deshaun looked up from his notebook. Even Marcus, who always had something to say, was silent. Shaq felt his heart crack open, because he knew what this moment cost a child. He knew what it meant for a 10-year-old girl, a girl whose family had moved to this country 2 years ago, a girl who was still learning where she fit. To stand up and speak truth to someone who could punish her for it. He knew because he had been a child who was afraid of adults with power. He knew because Lucille had taught him that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is a little girl with braids who says what's right, even when her voice is the smallest one in the room. Principal Whitfield's face changed. The irritation drained out of it and was replaced by something worse, something controlled, something that looked like a person carefully choosing which weapon to use. "Yemisi," she said. Her voice was ice wrapped in silk. That is not your concern. Sit down." "I am sitting down," Yemisi said quietly. A few kids giggled, nervous giggles, the kind that escape from your body when you're scared and amazed at the same time. Because Yemisi had said the truth. She was sitting down. And somehow that simple fact, that calm, unshakable fact, made Principal Whitfield look foolish. Whitfield's jaw tightened. She pointed one finger at Yemisi. Her hand was steady. Her voice was not. "One more word," she said, "and you'll have lunch detention for a week." She held the finger there for a moment, pointed at a child like a weapon, and then she turned and walked out. Her heels struck the floor like hammer blows. The sound echoed down the hallway and faded into nothing. The room was still. Then Yemisi's lip began to tremble. Just barely. The way a leaf trembles before it falls from a tree. She had been so brave, so strong. But she was still a child. And children feel the weight of what they've done after the moment passes. Shaq walked over to her desk. He knelt down, and at his size, kneeling still put him at eye level with a seated fourth grader. His knee touched the cold tile floor. He could hear the creak of his own body settling. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for standing up for me." Yamisi looked at him. Her eyes were wet. "She's mean," she whispered back. "She's mean to everyone. She's mean to Teo. She's mean to Miss Bernice. She's mean to Miss Priya. She was even mean to Mrs. Vega before she left. Nobody says anything because everyone is scared." "Are you scared?" Shaq asked. Yamisi thought about it. Really thought about it. Oh, the way a child thinks about something when they're treating the question with the seriousness it deserves. "I was," she said. "But then I thought about my dad. He drives a taxi in Newark every night. Sometimes people are mean to him because of his accent. He never fights back. He just keeps driving. But one time I asked him, 'Daddy, why don't you say something?' And he said, 'Yamisi, I say something every day. I show up. That is my something.' So I thought, today, this is my something." Shaq couldn't speak for a moment. His throat was tight. His eyes burned. A taxi driver in Newark. A man who showed up every day. And his daughter, who had learned that showing up is its own kind of courage. "Your dad is a wise man," Shaq finally said. "I know," Yamisi said. And for the first time since the principal had left, she smiled. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Shaq taught the remaining lessons from the textbook because he had to. But his mind was somewhere else. It was assembling something, connecting pieces, building a plan. After the final bell rang and the kids filed out, Shaq stayed behind. He erased the whiteboard. He stacked the chairs. He picked up the basketball from the desk and held it in his hands. Jupiter. A planet so big it has 67 moons orbiting around it. A planet that protects Earth from asteroids with its massive gravity, pulling dangerous objects away before they can strike. Shaq set the basketball down. He wanted to be Jupiter. He wanted to be big enough to pull the danger away from these kids. He was packing his leather bag when the door to the teacher's lounge opened and Priya Chakraborty walked in. Her eyes were red. Not pink, a red. The kind of red that comes from crying so hard that your body runs out of tears and starts burning instead. "What happened?" Shaq asked. Priya shook her head. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, like someone trying to start a car that won't turn over. "She denied my certification application," Priya finally said. Her voice sounded scraped raw. "Principal Whitfield. She contacted the district. She told them I wasn't ready. She told them my classroom management was inadequate. She told them I needed another full year of supervised practice." Shaq set his bag down. "Can she do that?" "She's the principal. The district trusts her recommendation. If she says I'm not ready, I'm not ready. That's how it works." Priya laughed, a short, broken sound. 3 years, Mr. Harrison. 3 years I've worked here. I come in early. And I stay late. I tutor kids on my lunch break. I grade papers on the bus. I spent $200 of my own money on supplies last month because the school budget didn't cover markers and construction paper. She sat down in one of the plastic chairs in the lounge. The chair wobbled on its uneven legs. And she didn't even tell me she was doing it. She didn't pull me aside. She didn't warn me. I found out from the district office. They sent me an email. An email. That's how I learned that 3 years of my life just got thrown away. Priya put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. She threw it away, Priya whispered through her fingers. Like Bernice's cookies. The comparison hit Shaq like a freight train, because it was perfect. That's exactly what Dolores Whitfield did. She took the things people worked for: cookies baked from a grandmother's recipe, a career built on 3 years of sacrifice, a child's confidence, a janitor's dignity, and she threw them in the trash. Casually, without ceremony, without even the decency of an apology. Shaq stood in the small lounge. His massive frame filled the room. His head nearly touched the ceiling tiles. He looked at Priya, this young woman who had given everything to a job that gave her nothing in return, and he felt something shift inside him. Something final. Like the last gear clicking into place in a machine that was now ready to move. He pulled out his phone. He called his manager, Leila Santiago. "Set up the reveal for Monday," he said. Leila hesitated. "Monday? Shaq, that's too soon. We need more footage. The network wants at least 2 weeks of material." "Oh, we've only got 5 days. Garrett says." "Monday," Shaq repeated. His voice was quiet, but absolute. The way the ocean is quiet before a wave. "And I need you to make some calls. I need the superintendent of Newark Public Schools in the building on Monday morning. I need a representative from the Newark Teachers Union. And I need a lawyer, someone who specializes in workplace misconduct in public schools." Silence on the other end. Long silence. The kind where you can hear someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about a situation. "Shaq," Leila said carefully, "what exactly are you planning?" "Something that's not in the script." He hung up. Priya was looking at him with swollen eyes. "Mr. Harrison? Are you okay?" Shaq looked at her. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to rip off the glasses. I pull off the fake name and say, "My name is Shaquille O'Neal. I have seen everything, and I am going to fix this." But not yet. Not today. Today he needed the disguise a little longer, because there was still work to do, calls to make, plans to build. And one more thing, one crucial, heavy, heartbreaking thing that he needed to deal with first. The last page of Deshawn's notebook. The page stuck to the inside of the back cover. The page that had been glued there so carefully that Shaq almost missed it. He had peeled it open gently. The way you open a letter you know will change everything. He hadn't told anyone what he found there. Not Garrett, not Leila, not even his mother, though he had almost told her on the phone when he broke down crying. It was a letter, written not by Deshawn, written to Deshawn. Now, and it was the most devastating, beautiful thing Shaq had ever read. Monday morning, everyone would find out what it said. But tonight, Shaq carried it alone. The weight of it pressed against his chest like a stone. And for the first time in his life, being the biggest person in the room didn't make him feel strong. It made him feel like a boy again. A boy in Newark, staring at the ceiling, wishing for a door. Saturday morning. Shaq sat on the edge of the bed in his hotel room at the Robert Treat Hotel in downtown Newark, named after the founder of the city. A place with history in its walls. He had requested this hotel specifically because it was 12 minutes from Meadowbrook Elementary. He wanted to stay close. He needed to stay close. The room was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that lets your thoughts get loud. He picked up his phone and called the first person he always called when the world felt too heavy. Lucille O'Neill answered on the second ring. She always did. Mothers of grown men still answer on the second ring. "Baby, how are you feeling today?" "I'm okay, Mom." "You're not okay. I can hear it. You sound like you did when you were 12, and Raymond Baker pushed you down at the bus stop, and you didn't want to tell me." Shaq almost smiled. His mother remembered everything, every bully, every bruise. Every night she sat on the edge of his bed and told him he was going to be somebody. Back when nobody else believed it. Back when he was just a too-tall kid from Newark with holes in his sneakers, just like Deshaun. "I need to tell you about the kids, Mom." He told her everything. He told her about Yamisi, and the girl with 2 braids who stood up to a principal and quoted her father, a taxi driver who showed up every day because showing up was his something. Lucille went quiet when she heard that part. The quiet of recognition. The quiet of a woman who had been that kind of parent. The kind who shows up even when showing up costs everything. He told her about Teo, 19 years of mopping floors, 19 years of being called the cleaning guy. Lucille made a sound, a small, sharp breath, because she had been that person too. She had worked jobs where people looked through her like she was made of glass. He told her about Bernice and the cookies, about Priya and the certification, about Principal Whitfield and the way she wielded her power like a hammer, not to build anything, but to break things, to break people. And then he told her about Deshaun, the drawings, the dragon, the city skyline with windows glowing different colors, the portrait of his mother crying and smiling at the same time, the door standing alone in the middle of a blank page with light pouring through the cracks. He told her about the words between the drawings. "Mom is sick again. We ate cereal for dinner, no milk. I don't want to go to the shelter again." Lucille cried, not the polite kind, the deep kind, the kind that sounds like it's being pulled from the bottom of a well. "That was me," she said through her tears. "When you were little, Shaquille. That was me, fighting for you in those schools, sitting in those offices, begging people to see my boy, to really see him. And nobody listened. And they looked at your size and your neighborhood, and they decided who you were before you ever opened your mouth. I know, Mom. And now there's another little boy in the same city, going through the same thing. Yes. Then you know what you have to do. I do. Don't you let that boy down, Shaquille. Don't you dare." "I won't, Mom. I promise." He hung up and sat with the phone in his hands for a long time. The screen went dark. His reflection stared back at him, distorted, stretched across the glass. A ghost version of himself. Then he went to work. He called his financial team, the group of advisors who managed his business empire. Shaq was not just a retired basketball player. He was a businessman who owned franchises, invested in companies, and managed a portfolio worth hundreds of millions. And he had earned more money after basketball than during it. And he had always believed that money was only useful if you used it to lift people up. "I want to set up college scholarship funds," he told his lead advisor, a woman named Catherine Reeves. "For every student in Mrs. Vega's 4th grade class. All 26 of them." Catherine paused. She was used to Shaq's generosity. She had managed donations, charity events, and surprise gifts for years. But this was different. She could hear it in his voice. Full scholarships? Whatever it takes to give them a chance. Community college, state school, trade school, whatever they choose. I want the money there when they're ready. Catherine ran the numbers. The total commitment, depending on tuition costs over the next 8 to 10 years, would be significant. At well over $500,000. Possibly more. "Shaq, that's a major commitment." "I know what it is." "Are you sure?" He thought about Yamisi studying 3 languages. He thought about Deshaun drawing cities he'd never visited. He thought about Marcus, who cracked jokes because laughing was easier than crying. He thought about all 26 of them. 26 futures sitting in plastic chairs in room 14B. I've never been more sure of anything. Catherine said she would have the paperwork ready by Tuesday. The next call was harder. He called a real estate contact in Newark, a man named Jerome Baptiste, who specialized in affordable housing in the city's South Ward. Shaq had worked with Jerome before on community projects. Jerome knew Newark the way a doctor knows a patient. Every strength, every wound, and every scar that never fully healed. Jerome, I need a 3-bedroom apartment, safe neighborhood, near Meadowbrook Elementary. Walking distance if possible. Good locks, clean building, a landlord who's not going to harass the tenant. Jerome was quiet for a moment. This for a family? A mother and her son. The mother works 2 jobs. She's been moving between a shelter on Boyden Street and a relative's apartment in Irvington. The boy is 10. How soon? As soon as possible. I'll have options by Monday. I'll cover the first year of rent. Jerome let out a slow whistle. Shaq, you know I love what you do, brother. But a year of rent? You sure this is a TV thing or a you thing? Shaq paused. He looked out the hotel window at the Newark skyline. The same skyline Deshawn had drawn in his notebook, and with every window glowing a different color. It's a me thing, Jerome. It's always been a me thing. After he hung up with Jerome, he made another call, this one to an art supply company, Blick Art Materials, which had a location on Bond Street in Lower Manhattan. He ordered a professional-grade drawing kit. Not a children's kit. Not a starter set. A professional kit. The kind a real artist uses. Graphite pencils in every grade from 9H to 9B. Charcoal sticks, vine and compressed. Kneaded erasers and precision erasers. A set of Prismacolor colored pencils. The 72-pack with colors that had names like burnt ochre and celadon green and Tuscan red. Watercolor pans. Brushes made from sable hair. 3 hardbound sketchbooks with thick, creamy paper that wouldn't bleed through. And an easel. A real wooden tabletop easel that folded flat so Deshawn could carry it with him. Everything a young artist needed to walk through that door he kept drawing. He asked them to wrap it in brown paper. No logos, no fancy ribbon, just simple paper and tape. Because Deshawn was the kind of kid who would care more about what was inside than what it looked like on the outside. Then Shaq did something nobody expected. Not the producers, not his manager, not his financial team. He called Mrs. Amalia Vega, the regular teacher, the woman whose classroom Shaq had been borrowing for 5 days, the woman whose rainbow was taped to the door, whose students called themselves Mrs. Vega's stars, the woman who was out for surgery. It took some work to get her number. He had Layla contact the Newark Teachers Union, who contacted the district, who contacted Mrs. Vega's emergency contact, her daughter, Elena Vega Soto, who lived in Elizabeth, New Jersey, 15 minutes south of Newark. Elena was cautious at first, protective, the way daughters are when their mothers are vulnerable. But when Layla explained who was calling and why, Elena gave them the number. Shaq dialed. It rang 4 times. Hello? The voice was tired. The voice of a woman recovering from surgery. But underneath the tiredness, there was warmth. The kind of warmth that Shaq recognized immediately. The warmth of a teacher. A real one. Mrs. Vega, my name is Shaquille O'Neal. Long pause. A very long pause. The kind where you can almost hear someone's brain reorganizing everything it thought it knew about the current moment. The basketball player? Mrs. Vega asked. Yes, ma'am. Another pause. Then, cautiously, is this a prank? Because my daughter's kids like to do this thing where they pretend to be famous people on the phone. Last week, her son called me pretending to be the Pope. Shaq laughed. A real laugh. The first one in days. No, ma'am. This is real. I promise. I've been substituting for your class this past week. At Meadowbrook. The silence that followed was different. It was the silence of a puzzle piece clicking into place. The silence of a woman realizing that the world is stranger and more surprising than she thought. Why? Mrs. Vega finally said. Just that one word, and it contained everything. So Shaq told her. He told her about the show, the undercover concept, the hidden cameras. And then he told her what he had found. Not footage for a show, but real people in real pain. Her students, her colleagues, her school. Mrs. Vega listened without interrupting. Teachers are good at that, the great ones especially. They know when to let someone finish. When Shaq was done, he asked the question he had called to ask. Mrs. Vega, I need to know something important. What can you tell me about Principal Whitfield? The warmth in Mrs. Vega's voice didn't disappear, but it moved aside to make room for something else. Something heavier. Something that sounded like a wound that had never been treated, because the person carrying it couldn't afford to stop working long enough to heal. When she spoke, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The way people speak when they're telling a truth they've been carrying for too long. She's the reason I needed surgery, Mr. O'Neill. Shaq gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? Last March, she ordered a room change. My classroom was being moved from the second floor to the first floor. She gave me 1 day's notice. 1 day. And she told me to move everything myself. 30 desks, 30 chairs, bookshelves, boxes of supplies, filing cabinets. She said the custodial staff was unavailable. What about Teo? She told Teo he wasn't allowed to help me. She said it was my responsibility because they were my classroom materials. Mrs. Vega's voice cracked slightly, like a branch that's been holding too much weight. I moved 27 desks by myself before my knee gave out. I heard the pop. I felt it go. I sat on the floor in the stairwell between the first and second floor, and I couldn't get up. A student found me, a 5th grader. She ran to get help. Shaq closed his eyes. I went to the hospital. They said I needed surgery, but I couldn't take time off. I didn't have enough sick days saved. If I took unpaid leave, I couldn't make rent. So I worked on a damaged knee for 7 months. 7 months, Mr. O'Neill. Walking on it, standing on it, teaching on it. Every day. Her voice broke fully now. Not into tears. Into something rawer than tears. Into exhaustion. The exhaustion of a woman who had been strong for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to rest. I finally collapsed in the classroom in October, in front of my students. The children, my stars, they were terrified. Yemisi ran to the front office to get help. Deshaun, quiet little Deshaun, put his hoodie under my head like a pillow and held my hand and said, "It's okay, Mrs. Vega. You're going to be okay." He was the calmest one in the room. A 10-year-old boy, a calmer than every adult in the building. Shaq couldn't speak. His throat had closed. Was any of this reported? He finally managed. To who? Mrs. Vega said. And in those 2 words was every frustration, every dead end, every ignored complaint, every system that was supposed to protect people and didn't. She is the report. Everything goes through her. Complaints go to her. Incident reports go to her. She controls the narrative. She always has. Shaq stood up from the hotel bed. He walked to the window. Newark stretched out below him. Thousands of buildings. Thousands of windows. Behind each one, a life. Behind each one, a story. He thought about Deshawn's drawing of the skyline. The boy had understood something that most adults miss, that a city isn't made of concrete and steel. It's made of people. And those people are either seen or invisible, treated with dignity or thrown away. Not anymore, Shaq said. Mrs. Vega was quiet. Mrs. Vega, I promise you, when you come back to that school, things are going to be different. I don't know exactly how yet, but I know they will be, because I'm going to make sure of it. Mrs. Vega let out a breath, long and slow, like she was exhaling something she had been holding inside her body for months, maybe years. You know what the worst part is? She said quietly. I still love those kids. After everything. After the knee and the surgery and the pain. I still can't wait to get back to room 14B. Because those children, they're the reason I became a teacher. Not the system. Not the principal. The children. I know, Shaq said. I've seen it. They love you too. They still call themselves Mrs. Vega's stars. She cried then, softly. The cry of a woman who has just been reminded that her work mattered. That all those years of showing up, with a bad knee, with no help, with a principal who treated her like furniture, all those years had meant something to someone. They talked for another 20 minutes about the students, about Yamisi's bravery, about Deshawn's art, about the rainbow on the door that Shaq had pressed back into place with his thumb on the first morning. When they hung up, Shaq stood at the window for a long time. Sunday came, the last day before the reveal. Shaq spent the morning making final arrangements. He confirmed with Layla that Dr. Clarice Monroe, the superintendent of Newark Public Schools, would be present at the school on Monday morning. And he confirmed that a representative from the Newark Teachers Union, a woman named Diane Okafor, would also attend. He confirmed that the attorney, a man named Rafael Estrada, who specialized in workplace misconduct in New Jersey public schools, had reviewed the footage and was prepared to advise on next steps. He confirmed with Jerome that an apartment had been found for the Morley family, a 3-bedroom on South 10th Street, 4 blocks from Meadowbrook Elementary. Clean building. Good locks. A landlord named Mr. Petrosian, who had agreed to a 1-year lease at a fair rate, fully covered by Shaq. He confirmed with Blick Art Materials that the drawing kit was ready for pickup Monday morning. Everything was in place. Sunday evening. Shaq stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his hotel room. He took off the thick black glasses. He peeled away the small prosthetic pieces the makeup team had used to soften his jawline. He ran water over his face and looked at his reflection. Without the disguise, he looked like himself. Shaquille O'Neal. The face on the icy hot commercials. The face on the TNT basketball broadcasts. The face that millions of people recognized. But for 5 days, nobody at Meadowbrook Elementary had seen that face. They had seen Mr. Harrison, a substitute teacher with a limp and a leather bag. A tall, gentle man who taught fractions with pizza and read Bridge to Terabithia with character voices and told a tired boy that being tired was not his fault. Tomorrow, Mr. Harrison would disappear, and Shaq would do what he did best, show up big when it mattered most. But there was still one thing unresolved. It's one piece of the story that hung in the air like a held breath. The last page of Deshawn's notebook. The page glued to the inside of the back cover. The page Shaq had carefully peeled open on Thursday afternoon in the empty classroom while the children were at recess. The page that wasn't a drawing, it was a letter. Written in neat, careful handwriting. Not Deshawn's handwriting, an adult's handwriting, a mother's handwriting. each letter formed with the slow precision of someone who wanted every word to be perfect, because she didn't know when or if she would get another chance to say them. Shaq had read that letter once. Standing in the empty classroom with the afternoon light falling through the windows and the distant sound of children laughing on the playground. He had read it once, and it had broken him open like an egg. He hadn't told anyone what it said. Not the producers, not Garrett, not Layla, not even Lucille, though he had come close during that phone call when he cried. He had kept it inside because some things are too sacred to share before the right moment. Some truths need to be spoken in the right room, to the right people, at the right time. Monday morning was the right time, and room 14B was the right room. Shaq turned off the bathroom light. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge. The mattress sagged under him. He laced his fingers together and bowed his head. He didn't pray out loud. He just sat there, breathing, thinking about a boy with a notebook, a girl with braids, a janitor with flowers, a grandmother with cookies, a young teacher with a dream, a veteran teacher with a broken knee, and a principal who had made the mistake of believing that cruelty was the same thing as power. Tomorrow, she would learn the difference. Shaq turned off the light. In the darkness of the hotel room, 7 stories above the streets of Newark, the biggest man in the building felt very small and very sure. Morning was coming, and with it, something that none of them, not the principal, not the children, not even Shaq himself, would ever forget. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. A light rain fell on Newark, the kind of rain that doesn't pour. It just hangs in the air like the city is breathing mist. The streets were slick. Puddles gathered in the cracks of the sidewalks. The sky looked like a sheet of old paper, low and heavy, pressing down on the rooftops. Shaq stood outside the Robert Treat Hotel at 6:45 in the morning, and he wore the brown sweater one last time. The thick glasses sat on his face one last time. The name tag that read Mr. Harrison was pinned to his chest one last time. A black SUV waited at the curb. Inside, Layla Santiago sat in the passenger seat, going over a checklist on her phone. In the back seat, 2 members of the production crew adjusted their equipment. "Everyone's confirmed," Layla said without looking up. "Dr. Clarice Monroe will be at the school by 8:15. Diane Okafor from the Teachers Union will arrive at 8:30. Rafael Estrada is driving up from his office in Trenton. He'll be there by 9. The news crew from WNBC is set up in a van on the next block. They won't enter until you give the signal." Shaq nodded. He didn't speak. He was looking out the window at the city passing by. Newark in the early morning. Coffee shops opening their gates. A man hosing down the sidewalk in front of a barber shop. A woman in scrubs waiting at a bus stop, her eyes closed, her head tilted back against the shelter glass. Tired. Everyone looked tired. He thought about what Yamisi's father had said. "I show up. That is my something." Today was Shaq's something. They arrived at Meadowbrook Elementary at 7:50. The parking lot was half full. Teachers' cars, a maintenance truck, and 3 vehicles that didn't belong. The production van, Dr. Monroe's black sedan, and a silver Honda that belonged to Diane Okafor. Shaq walked through the front doors of the school for the 6th and final time as Mr. Harrison. The hallway smelled the same. Floor cleaner and crayons. The paper butterflies still hung from the ceiling. Tio's flowers, a fresh bunch, a yellow daisies this time, sat on the windowsill by the entrance. Bought with his own money. As always. But today, the hallway felt different. There was an energy in the air. A hum. the kind of electricity that gathers before a storm breaks. Principal Whitfield noticed it immediately. She was standing outside her office, coffee cup in hand, when she saw the activity. Two people she didn't recognize, Dr. Monroe and Diane Okafor, were speaking quietly in the front vestibule. A man with a camera bag walked past the main office. A woman with a clipboard stood near the trophy case, speaking into a phone. Whitfield's eyes narrowed. She set her coffee down on the front desk. She straightened her blazer, and she marched toward Shaq, who was standing in the middle of the hallway, adjusting his leather bag on his shoulder. "Mr. Harrison." Her voice was sharp. Sharper than usual. The voice of a person who senses that something is happening outside her control. And control is the only thing she understands. "What is going on here? Why are there cameras in my school?" Shaq turned to face her. For 5 days, he had looked down at this woman and absorbed her words, her insults, her dismissals, her cruelty. He had swallowed every bitter thing she had said, about his lesson plans, about his doctorate, about the children, about the people who worked in this building. He had taken it all in and held it inside his chest like a breath he was saving for the right moment. This was the moment. He reached up and took off the glasses. Slowly. One hand. He folded them and slipped them into the pocket of the brown sweater. The sweater he would never wear again. "To Principal Whitfield," he said. His voice was deep, steady. The voice of a man who has practiced patience for 5 days and is now finished practicing. "My name isn't Mr. Harrison." He paused. Let the words land. Let the silence do its work. "My name is Shaquille O'Neal." He didn't say it loud. He didn't need to. The name filled the hallway the way thunder fills a valley. Not because of volume, but because of weight. The color drained from Principal Whitfield's face. It didn't fade. It drained, like water running out of a bathtub. Her skin went from its usual rigid composure to something pale and fragile. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. A fish pulled from water. A woman suddenly drowning in air. "I have a doctorate in education from Barry University," Shaq continued. He took one step closer to her. Not aggressive, not threatening. Just closer. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at him. Way back. "I am a 4-time NBA champion. I have played in front of 20,000 people. I have been on television in 40 countries. And for the past 5 days, I have stood in this building and watched you bully, belittle, and disrespect every single person who works here." The hallway had gone silent. Completely silent. The kind of silence that has texture, that has weight. You could feel it pressing against the walls. Doors opened, slowly, one by one, teachers stepped out of their classrooms. Mrs. Delgado from 2nd grade, Mr. Franklin from 5th, the art teacher, Ms. Yoon, the reading specialist, Mrs. Babatunde. They stood in their doorways, drawn out by the gravity of the moment, and by the impossible sight of a man they suddenly recognized standing in their hallway. Teo stood frozen at the end of the corridor. His mop was in his hands. His mouth was open. He looked like a man watching a miracle and trying to decide if it was real. Bernice Calloway stood near the cafeteria entrance, both hands over her mouth, her eyes wide, her body absolutely still. Priya Chakraborty stepped out of the supply closet where she had been counting math workbooks. She held a stack of books against her chest like armor. Her eyes locked on Shaq's face, the real face, the face without glasses, the face she had seen 1,000 times on television. And the books slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. She didn't pick them up. "The way you treated me," Shaq said. his eyes never leaving Whitfield's. "That I can handle. I've had people try to tear me down my whole life. On the court, off the court. I can take it." He paused. Let the next words gather their full power. "But the way you treated them?" He pointed. "Not generally, specifically." He pointed at Teo, standing at the end of the hall with his mop. He pointed at Bernice, frozen near the cafeteria. He pointed at Priya, standing among her fallen books. And then he turned and pointed at the open door of room 14B, where 26 children sat at their desks, watching through the doorway with wide, uncertain eyes. "That," Shaq said, "is the real problem. That is why I'm here." Principal Whitfield's mouth moved. Words tried to form but collapsed before they could become sound. She looked around. At the cameras she now noticed everywhere. At the people in the vestibule she didn't recognize. Out at her staff standing in their doorways, staring at her with expressions she had never seen on their faces before. The expressions of people who are watching justice arrive. This is an ambush," she finally stammered. The word came out shaky, broken, like a plate that's been dropped and is trying to hold itself together. "You can't. You have no right to come into my school and—" "No," Shaq said. His voice was calm, not angry. Calm is worse than angry. Calm is a man who has already decided. "This isn't an ambush. An ambush is what you did to Mrs. Vega when you made her move 30 desks alone and destroyed her knee. An ambush is what you did to Priya when you killed her certification without telling her. An ambush is what you did to a 10-year-old boy when you called him lazy in front of his classmates because he fell asleep. Because he was tired, Principal Whitfield. Because he was hungry and exhausted and living in a shelter. And you called him lazy." Each sentence landed like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples spreading outward, reaching every corner of the hallway, reaching every person standing in every doorway. Whitfield's hand reached for the wall. She steadied herself. For the first time in perhaps years, she looked small. Not because Shaq was tall, though he was. She looked small because cruelty, when it's finally exposed to daylight, always looks small. It looks exactly as small as it really is. Dr. Clarice Monroe stepped forward. She was a tall woman herself, 5'10", with silver-rimmed glasses and the kind of composure that comes from 30 years in education administration. She had been standing quietly in the vestibule, watching, listening, taking it all in. Now she moved with purpose. "Dolores," Dr. Monroe said. Her voice was professional but firm. The voice of a woman who has made difficult decisions before and is about to make another one. "We need to have a conversation in your office. Now." Whitfield looked at Dr. Monroe, then at Diane Okafor from the union, who stood behind the superintendent with a folder in her hands. A folder that Whitfield somehow understood contained things she did not want read aloud. Then at Rafael Estrada, who had arrived in the last few minutes and stood near the front desk with a briefcase and an expression that said he had reviewed the evidence and found it sufficient. I don't understand what's happening," Whitfield said. But she did understand. Her voice said she didn't, but her eyes said she did. Her eyes said she had always known this day might come. The day when the people she had stepped on would find a voice. She just never imagined the voice would belong to someone 7 feet tall. "This way, Dolores," Dr. Monroe said gently, firmly. "The way you guide someone toward a door they don't want to walk through." Principal Whitfield walked toward her office on legs that didn't look steady. Dr. Monroe walked beside her. Diane Okafor followed. Rafael Estrada brought up the rear, his briefcase held at his side like a book of evidence. which, in many ways, it was. The office door closed behind them. The hallway exhaled. Teachers looked at each other. Teo set his mop against the wall and pressed both hands against his face. Bernice sat down on the bench near the cafeteria and stared at the floor, shaking her head slowly, over and over, as if she was trying to wake up from a dream she wasn't sure was real. Priya knelt down and began picking up her scattered books, and then stopped, and then started crying. Not sad crying, a different kind. The kind that happens when a weight you've been carrying for so long you forgot it was, there is suddenly lifted, and your body doesn't know what to do with the lightness. But Shaq didn't stay in the hallway. He had one more thing to do, the most important thing. He turned and walked toward room 14B, toward the rainbow door, and toward 26 children who were about to learn that their substitute teacher was someone they never could have imagined, and toward a boy in the third row with a notebook full of drawings and a letter glued to the back cover that would break every heart in the room. Shaq pushed the door open. The children stared at him. He looked different. The glasses were gone. He was standing straighter. His limp had vanished. Something about him had changed. They could feel it, even if they couldn't name it. He looked bigger, not taller, just bigger. The way a person looks when they stop pretending to be less than they are. Some of the kids looked confused. A few looked worried. They had heard voices in the hallway and the principal's name, and they knew enough about the world to know when something big was happening. Yamisi raised her hand. Of course she did. Yamisi always raised her hand. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "what's happening? Why was the principal upset? Is everything okay?" Shaq walked to the front of the classroom. He stood in the spot where he had stood every day for 5 days, next to the whiteboard, under the poster that said, "You belong here." He looked at them, all 26, every face. Marcus in the back row, trying to look cool but failing because his eyes were too wide. Soleil, clutching her pencil like a security blanket. Kendrick with his Saturn drawing still taped to the corner of his desk. The boy who had asked if Shaq was a giant on the first day, his name was Little Otis, and he was practically falling out of his chair trying to see what was going on. And Deshawn, third row, second seat from the window, gray hoodie, notebook open, pencil in hand, watching, quiet, always quiet. Shaq took a breath, the deepest breath he had ever taken, deeper than any breath before a free throw, deeper than any breath before a championship game, because this moment mattered more than any game he had ever played. "I need to tell you all something," he said. "Something important. And I need you to listen. Can you do that for me?" 26 heads nodded. "My real name isn't Mr. Harrison." The room went still. "My real name is Shaquille O'Neal. Some of you might know who I am." He paused. For exactly 1 second, nothing happened. The name hung in the air like a balloon waiting to pop. Then Marcus, who sat in the back and cracked jokes and hid his pain behind laughter. Marcus shot straight up out of his chair like he had been electrically shocked. His chair flew backward and hit the bookshelf. The books tumbled. He didn't notice. "Shaq!" Marcus screamed. His voice cracked so hard it jumped 2 octaves. "You're Shaq! The Shaq! Shaquille O'Neal Shaq!" The room exploded. Kids jumped out of their seats. Chairs scraped across the floor. Desks slid. Soleil screamed, a high, pure scream of disbelief, and grabbed the girl next to her by both arms. Kendrick stood on his chair and pointed and yelled, "I knew it! I knew he was famous! I told you he was famous!" Even though he had absolutely never said that, and everyone knew it. Little Otis fainted. Actually fainted. His eyes rolled back, his body went limp, and he slid sideways out of his chair like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The boy next to him, a kid named Jalen, caught him under the arms and held him up with a look of total panic. "Otis is down!" Jalen screamed. "Somebody help! Otis is down!" "He's fine," Marcus yelled from the back. "He just does that. He fainted when we had a fire drill last month, too." Otis's eyes fluttered open. He looked up at Jalen's terrified face, then over at Shaq, then back at Jalen. "Did he say Shaq?" Otis whispered. "Yeah, bro." Otis fainted again. The room was chaos. Beautiful, ridiculous, magical chaos. Kids were laughing and screaming and jumping and hugging each other. Yamisi had both hands pressed against her cheeks, her mouth open in a perfect O. A girl named Destiny was crying. Happy crying, the kind with a smile underneath. Shaq stood in the middle of it and let it wash over him. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to cry. He wanted to pick up every single one of these kids and carry them on his shoulders. But then his eyes found Deshaun, and the chaos faded. Deshaun hadn't moved. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't jumped out of his chair. He sat in his seat in the third row, both hands gripping his notebook, staring at Shaq with eyes so wide they looked like two full moons rising over the Newark skyline he had drawn. His lips were parted. His breath was shallow. His knuckles were white against the black cover of his composition book. He wasn't celebrating. He was processing. Because for a kid like Deshaun, a kid who had learned to keep his happiness quiet, who had learned to make himself small, who had learned that good things were usually followed by bad things, this moment was too big to feel all at once. It had to be taken in slowly, carefully, the way you step into water when you're not sure how deep it is. Shaq walked toward him. The other kids noticed. One by one, they went quiet. DeMarcus sat back down. Soleil lowered her hands. Even Otis, who had been revived for the second time, went still. Something in the air changed. The energy shifted from celebration to something else. Something sacred. Shaq knelt down in front of Deshaun's desk. His knee touched the tile. The room was silent now. 25 children watched. They didn't understand yet what was about to happen, but they could feel it. Kids always feel it. They feel the weight of a moment even when they can't name it. "Deshaun," Shaq said softly, "I read your notebook. All of it." Deshaun's lower lip trembled. Even the last page. A tear slid down Deshaun's cheek. He didn't wipe it. He didn't move. He just held his notebook tighter. The page you glued to the back cover. More tears now. Silent tears. The kind that come when a secret you've been guarding with everything you have is finally, gently lifted from your hands. "Do you want to tell them?" Shaq whispered. "Or should I?" Deshaun looked at Shaq. Then he looked around the room, at his classmates, at the faces he saw every day, at the people who were the closest thing he had to stability in a life that shifted like sand. He looked at Yamisi, who was watching him with soft, serious eyes. He looked at Marcus, who for once had no jokes. He looked at little Otis, who was fully conscious and fully still. Then Deshaun looked back at Shaq, and in a voice barely louder than a breath, he said, "You tell them." Shaq nodded. He stood up slowly. His knees ached from kneeling on the cold tile. A real ache now, not the fake limp he had invented for Mr. Harrison. He turned to face the class. 25 children watched him. 25 pairs of eyes. Some still wet from laughing. Some wide with confusion. all of them locked on him with the kind of attention that only comes when children understand, in their bones, that something true is about to be said. Deshaun sat behind him. Shaq could hear the boys breathing, quick and shallow, the breathing of someone who has handed over the heaviest thing they own and is waiting to see if the person holding it will be careful with it. Shaq would be careful. "I need to tell you about something I found in Deshaun's notebook," Shaq said. His voice was low, quiet. Not his TV voice, not his basketball voice, his real voice. The voice underneath all the other voices. "And I need you to listen with your hearts, not just your ears. Can you do that?" 25 heads nodded. Not one sound. On the last page of Deshaun's notebook, the very last page, glued to the inside of the back cover so nobody would find it, there was a letter. He paused. He could feel the words building in his chest like water behind a dam. It wasn't written by Deshaun. It was written to Deshaun, by his mother. The room was so quiet that Shaq could hear the rain tapping against the windows, light and steady, like the sky was listening too. Deshaun's mom, her name is Tamika. She wrote this letter 3 months ago. She was in the hospital. She has been very sick. The kind of sick that makes a parent lie awake at night and worry, not about themselves, but about their child, about what happens to their child if they can't be there. Yamisi's hand moved to her chest. She pressed it flat against her heart, like she was holding something inside. Tamika didn't know when Deshaun would find this letter. She hid it in his notebook, the one thing she knew he would never lose, because that notebook goes everywhere with him. She tucked it inside the back cover and glued it shut. And she wrote it with perfect handwriting, every letter neat and careful, because she wanted the words to be worthy of her son. Shaq reached into the pocket of the brown sweater. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not the original. He would never take Deshaun's letter from him. This was a copy he had made on Sunday night in the hotel business center. He had stood at the copy machine at 11 o'clock at night, his hands trembling, making one copy of a letter written by a mother who loved her son more than her own life. He unfolded the paper. His hands that had held championship trophies, hands that had shattered backboards, hands that had shaken the hands of presidents. Those hands shook. "I'm going to read this to you," Shaq said, "because Deshaun gave me permission, and because I think you all need to hear it." He looked down at the words. He had read them 5 times already. On Thursday, in the empty classroom. On Friday, in the production van. On Saturday, in the hotel room. On Sunday, before bed. And this morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, practicing so his voice wouldn't break. It broke anyway. He began, "Dear Deshaun." 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words. And Shaq's voice cracked down the middle like ice in spring. He stopped, breathed, pressed his lips together, found the voice again. "Dear Deshaun, if you are reading this, it means I am in the hospital again." A small sound came from behind him, and from Deshaun. Not a word, just a breath. The kind of breath that leaks out when your body can't hold everything inside anymore. "I hid this note so you would find it when you needed it most. Maybe that's today. Maybe that's next month. Maybe that's a long time from now. Whenever you find it, I want you to know that what I'm about to say is true today, tomorrow, and every day after." Shaq's vision blurred. The words on the page swam. He blinked hard and kept going. "You are the reason I fight every single day." In the second row, Soleil started crying, quietly, tears running down her face into the collar of her shirt. She didn't make a sound. When the doctors ask me why I keep going, I don't tell them about medicine or treatment or hope. I tell them about you. I tell them about my son who draws dragons so real, I swear I can feel the fire. I tell them about my son who draws cities with every window glowing a different color because he believes that every person deserves their own kind of light. Marcus. Big, loud, joke-cracking Marcus. He put his head down on his desk. His shoulders shook. He covered his face with his arms and nobody said a word, because nobody needed to. Your drawings are magic, Deshawn. I know you think they're just pictures. I know you think they're just pencil on paper. But they're not. They are the way you see the world. And the way you see the world is more beautiful than the way most people will ever see it. Shaq stopped reading. He had to. His throat had closed almost completely. He pressed the paper against his chest and looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights hummed above him. He took 3 breaths. Slow ones. And then he looked back at the letter. Sometimes I hear you crying at night when you think I'm asleep. I want you to know. I hear you. I always hear you. And every time, I want to come to your bed and hold you and make everything better. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm too tired or too sick. And those are the nights I hate myself. From behind Shaq, a sound. A small, broken sound. Deshawn had put his face in his hands. His shoulders curled inward. His body folded like a paper crane collapsing. Yemisi stood up from her desk. Without a word. Without permission. Without looking at anyone. She walked across the classroom to Deshawn's desk. She sat down in the empty chair next to him, and she put her arm around his shoulders. She didn't say anything. She just held on. Shaq watched them for a moment. Then he looked back at the letter. Almost done. Almost there. But I need you to hear this, baby. Really hear it. His voice was barely holding, thread thin, glass fragile. Don't ever let anyone, any teacher, any principal, any kid on the bus, any person in this world, tell you that you are not enough. He read the next line, and this was the line that broke the room wide open. You are not the shelter we sleep in. You are not the cereal without milk. You are not the holes in your sneakers. A gasp. From everywhere. From nowhere. From the collective chest of 25 children who suddenly understood something they had never understood before. That Deshawn's life was harder than any of them knew. That the quiet boy in the gray hoodie, who never raised his hand and never spoke and never laughed, too loud had been carrying a weight that would have crushed most adults. And he had been carrying it in silence. Every day, sitting right next to them. You are my son. You are an artist. You are brave and kind and gentle. And you are the most beautiful thing I have ever made. Shaq's tears fell onto the paper. Dark circles spreading across the words. He didn't wipe them. You are my masterpiece, Deshawn. He stopped. One line left. He read it in a whisper. Love, Mom. The paper lowered. The room was destroyed. In the most beautiful way a room can be destroyed. Like a dam breaking and flooding a dry valley with water that will make everything grow. Priya Chakraborty stood in the doorway. Nobody knew when she had arrived. Her hand was over her mouth. Tears streamed between her fingers and ran down her wrist. Her body was shaking so hard that she had to hold the doorframe to stay standing. Antio stood behind her. The man who had mopped these floors for 19 years. The man who bought flowers with his own money and placed them on windowsills that nobody noticed. He was crying without shame. His mop was gone. His hands were at his sides. Tears rolled down his weathered face and fell from his chin like Shaq's tears had fallen onto the letter. Silently, steadily, honestly. Bernice was there too, somewhere behind Teo. You could hear her before you could see her. A soft, wailing sound. The sound a grandmother makes when she sees a child in pain. Because to Bernice, every child in this school was her grandchild. Every single one. And in the room, in room 14B, Mrs. Vega's stars. 25 children sat in their chairs and felt something they would remember for the rest of their lives. And the feeling of hearing a mother's love spoken aloud. The feeling of understanding that the kid sitting next to you has a whole world inside them that you never knew about. The feeling that comes when you realize, truly realize, that everyone is carrying something. Yemisi held Deshaun, her arm tight around his shoulders, her braids falling against his gray hoodie. She didn't cry. She was done crying. Her face was fierce. The face of a girl who had decided something. The face of a girl who would never, ever let this boy feel alone again. Then Shaq turned around. He faced Deshaun. He knelt down one more time. The tile was cold under his knee. The room was warm with grief and love. The two things that, when you really think about it, are just different sides of the same door. Deshaun, Shaq said, I talked to your mom this weekend. Deshaun lifted his face from his hands. His cheeks were streaked with tears. His eyes were swollen. But inside those eyes, deep inside, beneath the pain and the fear and the exhaustion, there was something that hadn't been there before. A flicker. Small, but real. Like a match struck in a dark room. Hope. You talked to my mom? Deshaun whispered. I did. She's doing better, Deshaun. She's getting stronger. The doctors are taking good care of her. And she told me to tell you something. What? She said, tell my son I'm coming home. Deshaun's face crumpled. Not in sadness, in relief. The kind of relief that your body has been holding back for months because you were too afraid to feel it. Because if you let yourself hope, and the hope turns out to be wrong, the fall is too far. But this wasn't wrong. This was real. And Deshaun, there's something else. The boy looked at him, waiting. Open. A door with light pouring through the cracks. You're not going back to the shelter. Not ever. The words hung in the air. I found an apartment for your family. It's 4 blocks from this school. On South 10th Street. 3 bedrooms. Good locks. Clean. Safe. Your mom can walk you to school when the weather's nice. You'll have your own room, Deshaun. Your own space. A place to put your drawings on the wall. Deshaun opened his mouth. No sound came out. His brain was trying to process something it had never processed before. The concept that something good was happening and nobody was about to take it away. I'm covering the rent for 1 full year, Shaq said. And after that, Aunt, we're going to make sure your mom has the support she needs. Housing assistance, medical care, everything. Deshaun still couldn't speak. He sat in his chair, shaking, his notebook in his lap, Yemisi's arm around him, and he looked at Shaq with an expression that no camera could ever fully capture. Because it wasn't just one emotion. It was all of them. Every feeling a 10-year-old boy who has been surviving instead of living can possibly feel when someone finally says, I see you, and I'm not going to look away. Then Shaq reached under Mrs. Vega's desk. He pulled out a box wrapped in brown paper. Simple. No logos, no ribbon, just paper and tape. This is for you, Shaq said. He set it on Deshaun's desk. Deshaun looked at the box. He looked at Shaq. He looked at Yemisi, who gave him a small nod. The nod of a friend who is telling you it's okay to accept something wonderful. He peeled the brown paper open slowly, carefully, the way he did everything, with attention, with precision. with the hands of an artist who understands that how you unwrap something matters. Inside was the drawing kit, the graphite pencils in every grade, the charcoal sticks, the Prismacolor colored pencils, 72 of them, in colors with names like burnt ochre and celadon green and Tuscan red, the watercolor pans, the sable hair brushes, the 3 hardbound sketchbooks with paper thick enough to hold anything he wanted to put on them, and the easel, the wooden tabletop easel that folded flat. Deshawn touched the pencils, one by one, running his fingertip across each one like he was reading Braille, like he was making sure they were real. "This is for me?" he whispered. "All of it." "But I didn't." His voice caught. "I didn't do anything to earn this." Shaq shook his head, slowly, firmly, with every ounce of certainty he had ever felt about anything in his life. "Deshawn, you earn it every day, every time you open that notebook and draw something beautiful in a world that hasn't been beautiful to you. Every time you sit in this classroom and try even when trying is hard. Every time you put your hoodie under Mrs. Vega's head because she fell and you wanted her to be comfortable. You earn it by being exactly who you are." Deshawn looked at the pencils, then at the easel, then at the sketchbooks with their thick, creamy pages waiting to be filled. Then he threw his arms around Shaq. This boy, this small, quiet, 10-year-old boy who weighed maybe 70 pounds and wore a gray hoodie 2 sizes too big and sneakers with holes in the toes. He wrapped his arms around Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1, 325 pounds, 4-time NBA champion, holder of a doctorate in education, one of the most recognized human beings on the planet. And he held on, and Shaq held him back. He wrapped his massive arms around this child and held him the way Philip Harrison had held young Shaquille when the world was too heavy and the nights were too dark. Gently, completely, like holding a bird that has been out in a storm and finally found a place to land. The room responded the only way it could. Marcus stood up. He walked to Deshawn's desk. He didn't say a joke. He didn't say a word. He put his hand on Deshawn's back. Soleil stood up. Not then Kendrick, then Destiny, then little Otis, who walked over on unsteady legs and wrapped his arms around whatever part of the group he could reach, which happened to be Shaq's left elbow. Then Jalen, then the twins, Sophia and Isabella. Then a boy named Kwame, and a girl named Luz, and a boy named Aiden, and a girl named Fatumata. One by one, all of them, every single one, 26 children, piled onto and around a kneeling giant and a small boy with a notebook. A group hug so big and so tangled that you couldn't tell where one child ended and another began. Arms over arms, hands gripping shirts, foreheads pressed against backs. A human knot made of love and tears, and the kind of fierce, unbreakable loyalty that only children know how to build. Priya came in from the doorway. She knelt at the edge of the group and put her arms around whoever she could reach. Teo stepped into the room for the first time. The man who had spent 19 years in the hallway, never in the classroom, and he placed one rough, gentle hand on the top of the pile and closed his eyes. Bernice stood just inside the door, her hands clasped in front of her, tears streaming, whispering something over and over that sounded like, "Thank you, Lord," but might have just been, "Thank you." The cameras captured all of it, every angle, every tear, every hand reaching for another hand. But the cameras didn't catch the most important moment, the moment that happened in the center of the pile, where no lens could reach. The moment that belonged only to Shaq and Deshawn. In the middle of all those arms, pressed against Shaq's chest. In his face buried in the brown sweater, Deshaun Morley whispered something so quiet that only Shaq could hear it. So quiet that it was barely a vibration in the air. "You're the door, Mr. Harrison. You're the door I drew." Shaq closed his eyes, and for the second time in a week, inside a classroom in Newark, New Jersey, in the city where he was born, in a school that smelled like floor cleaner and crayons, surrounded by 26 children, and a janitor, and a grandmother, and a young teacher who had almost given up, Shaquille O'Neal cried. But these tears were different. These tears were the door opening. The fallout was swift. Within 48 hours of the reveal, the Newark School District launched a formal investigation into Principal Dolores Whitfield's conduct at Meadowbrook Elementary. The investigation was led by Dr. Clarice Monroe personally. The superintendent, who had stood in that hallway on Monday morning and watched a 7'1" man take off a pair of fake glasses and dismantle a decade of unchecked cruelty with nothing but the truth. The evidence was overwhelming. Rafael Estrada, the attorney, presented the district's review board with over 40 hours of footage from the hidden cameras. Every interaction, every dismissal, every moment of belittlement captured in high definition. Teo being called the cleaning guy. Bernice's cookies being thrown in the trash. Priya's certification being sabotaged behind her back. The moment Whitfield pointed her finger at a 10-year-old girl and threatened lunch detention because that girl dared to say her teacher was good. But the footage was only the beginning. Once the story broke, and it broke fast, first on WNBC's local broadcast, then on social media, then on national outlets, people started calling in. Teachers who had worked at Meadowbrook years ago, support staff who had left quietly, parents who had filed complaints that went nowhere because every complaint landed on the desk of the person being complained about. Dr. Monroe confirmed publicly that at least 17 formal complaints had been filed against Whitfield over the past 4 years. 17. And not a single one had been thoroughly investigated. The system had failed. Not because the system didn't exist, but because one person had positioned herself as both the problem and the gatekeeper to the solution. Within 2 weeks, Principal Dolores Whitfield was placed on administrative leave. She never returned to Meadowbrook Elementary, and she was reassigned to a desk position at the district's administrative office, a windowless room on the 3rd floor of a building on Broad Street, where she processed paperwork and answered to people who had once answered to her. She never ran a school again. Some people said the punishment wasn't enough. Some people said it was too much. Shaq said nothing about it publicly. When reporters asked, he gave the same answer every time. This was never about punishment. This was about protection, protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. But Shaq didn't just tear things down. That was the part the world didn't expect. The part that turned a local news story into something that lived in people's hearts long after the headlines faded. Because anyone can expose a villain, and it takes something rarer, something that requires both money and heart, both power and tenderness, to build something in the space where the villain used to stand. Shaq built. He started with the scholarships. True to his word, he funded education accounts for all 26 students in Mrs. Vega's 4th grade class. Every child received a fund designated for their future schooling, community college, state university, trade school, art school, whatever path they chose. His financial team, led by Catherine Reeves, structured the funds so they would grow over the next 8 years, adjustable for tuition inflation and individual need. The total initial commitment was $640,000. When a reporter from the Newark Star-Ledger asked Shaq If the number gave him pause, he shook his head. "Yeah, I spent more than that on a car once," he said. "And that car is sitting in a garage right now, doing nothing. These kids are going to do everything." The scholarships were announced at a school assembly 2 weeks after the reveal. All 26 children sat in the front row of the cafeteria. When Shaq told them, simply, clearly, without fanfare, that their college was paid for, the room went so quiet you could hear the clock on the wall ticking. Then Marcus stood up. Big, loud Marcus. The boy who cracked jokes because laughing was easier than crying. The boy who had put his head on his desk and shaken with silent sobs when Tamika Morley's letter was read aloud. He stood up in the front row of that cafeteria, looked directly at Shaq, and said, "Mr. Harrison, Shaq, I don't know what to call you." "You can call me whatever you want, Marcus." "Okay, Shaq. I just want to say, nobody ever told me I was going to college. Nobody. My mom works at a laundromat. My dad, I don't even know where my dad is. And I thought college was for other kids, not for kids like me." He paused. His voice cracked. But he didn't sit down. He stood there, this 11-year-old boy in a basketball jersey 2 sizes too big, and he finished his sentence. "So thank you for making me feel like I'm one of the other kids." The cafeteria erupted. Not in screams this time, in applause. Teachers, staff, parents who had been invited. Even the lunch ladies, standing behind the counter in their hairnets, clapping with plastic gloves on. Shaq didn't trust himself to speak. He just nodded and pointed at Marcus, the way a coach points at a player who just made the shot of his life. Next, he kept his promise to Deshaun. The apartment on South 10th Street was ready within 10 days of the reveal. Jerome Baptiste had found exactly what Shaq asked for: a clean 3-bedroom in a well-maintained brick building 4 blocks from Meadowbrook Elementary. The landlord, Mr. Aram Petrosian, was a quiet man in his 60s who had immigrated from Armenia in 1989 and had been managing rental properties in Newark's South Ward for 25 years. When Jerome told him the story, not Shaq's name, just the story, a mother and son who needed a safe place, Mr. Petrosian lowered the rent by $200 a month without being asked. "I was a boy once," Mr. Petrosian said, "in a country that was falling apart. Someone gave my family a place. I'm still paying it back." Shaq covered the first full year of rent. His team connected Tamika Morley with a social worker named Claudette Simmons, who specialized in transitional housing support. Claudette helped Tamika apply for long-term housing assistance through the Newark Housing Authority, set up a payment plan for medical bills, and connected her with a patient advocacy program at University Hospital that would coordinate her ongoing treatment. The day Tamika and Deshaun moved in, Shaq was there. He carried boxes, not because he had to, because he wanted to. He carried a box labeled Deshaun's art stuff up 2 flights of stairs and set it gently in the smaller bedroom, the one with a window that faced east, at where the morning light would pour in and fall across a desk that Shaq had bought and assembled himself the night before. He had also hung something on the wall above the desk, a framed print, not of a basketball player, not of a championship trophy. It was a photograph of the painting that hangs in the Louvre, a vast, luminous canvas of light breaking through clouds. The kind of image that makes you feel like a door is opening somewhere in the sky. Underneath it, Shaq had written in black marker on the matboard, "For the boy who draws doors, keep drawing, Mr. Harrison." When Deshaun walked into his room and saw it, he stood in the doorway for a very long time. He didn't say anything. He just stood there with his composition notebook in one hand and his new art kit in the other, looking at his room. His room. A room with a door that closed, and a window that opened, and walls where he could tape his drawings, and a desk where he could sit and create without worrying about whether he would sleep in this same spot tomorrow. Tamika stood behind him. She was thinner than she had been. The illness had carved hollows under her cheekbones. But her eyes, Deshawn's eyes, the same deep brown, were bright, alive, full of the kind of light that only shows up when a person who has been surviving finally starts living. She put her hand on Deshawn's shoulder. "You okay, baby?" Deshawn nodded. Then he walked to the desk. He opened his new sketchbook to the first page. The paper was thick and cream-colored and smooth. He picked up one of the graphite pencils, a 2B, the one that feels like drawing with silk, and he drew a single line on the beginning of something. Tamika looked at Shaq. She mouthed 2 words, no sound, just her lips moving. But Shaq read them as clearly as if she had spoken them through a megaphone. "Thank you." He nodded. That was enough. That was everything. Now, Priya. Shaq personally contacted the Newark School District on her behalf. He didn't demand. He didn't threaten. He simply asked Dr. Monroe to review Priya Chakraborty's file without Whitfield's recommendation attached. To look at the work instead of the opinion. To see the teacher instead of the principal's shadow. Dr. Monroe agreed. The new principal of Meadowbrook Elementary, a woman named Dr. Rosalind Grant, was brought in 6 weeks after Whitfield's departure. Dr. Grant was 53 years old. She had spent 20 years teaching in Newark public schools before moving into administration. She had started as a substitute teacher. She knew what it felt like to walk into a building and be treated like you didn't belong. Her first week, she observed Priya's teaching. She watched Priya lead a math lesson using colored tiles and partner work. She watched Priya kneel beside a struggling reader and patiently sound out words, syllable by syllable, until the child's face shifted from frustration to understanding. She watched Priya stay 45 minutes after the final bell to set up a science station for the next day. Dr. Grant wrote Priya's recommendation letter herself. It was 1 page long, single-spaced. She called it the easiest letter she had ever written. Priya's teaching certification was approved within 3 months. She became a full-time teacher at Meadowbrook Elementary, assigned to 3rd grade in the classroom directly next to room 14B. On her first day as a certified teacher, she found a bouquet of flowers on her desk. Yellow daisies, no card. But she knew who they were from, because Teo had been buying yellow daisies for 19 years. She cried at her desk for 5 minutes. Then she blew her nose, straightened her blouse, and opened the door for her students. That's what real teachers do. They cry. Then they teach. And speaking of Teo, Shaq gave Teodoro Ruiz a $10,000 bonus out of his own pocket. He presented it to Teo in person, in the hallway outside the front office, in the exact spot where Whitfield had walked across his clean floor without looking at him. "This is for 19 years of showing up," Shaq said. "For the flowers, for the floors, for every day you made this school a better place, and nobody said thank you." Teo looked at the check. He looked at Shaq. He looked back at the check. Then he did something nobody at Meadowbrook had ever seen Teo do. He laughed. A full, open, head-back laugh. The laugh of a man who had been holding it in for so long that when it finally came out, it sounded like a window being thrown open on the first warm day of spring. 57 years old, Teo said, shaking his head. "And this is the first time anyone gave me a bonus for mopping." Shaq posted about Teo on his Instagram account. The post included a photo of Teo standing in the Meadowbrook hallway, holding his mop, grinning so wide his face could barely contain it. The caption was simple. "This man's name is Teodoro Ruiz, and he's been taking care of a school in Newark for 19 years. He buys flowers with his own money to make the hallway beautiful. He's never been thanked properly. Until now." The post went viral. 3 million likes in 48 hours. Comments poured in from around the world. Strangers tagged their own school janitors. A hashtag started. Hashtag Thank Your Teo. And within a week, thousands of people had posted photos of the custodians, janitors, and maintenance workers who kept their schools running without recognition. The Newark School District, perhaps feeling the pressure of public attention, finally approved the raise Teo had been requesting for 6 years. It wasn't a large raise, but it was an acknowledgement, a piece of paper that said, "We see you." Teo framed it. He hung it next to his locker in the maintenance closet. Right next to a photo of his 3 daughters. And Bernice. Bernice Calloway's cookies became the most famous cookies in Newark. After Shaq posted about the cookie incident, how Whitfield had thrown an entire tin of homemade cookies into the trash in front of the woman who baked them. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A local bakery called Sweet Science on Halsey Street reached out to Bernice with an offer. They would provide kitchen space, packaging, and distribution support if Bernice wanted to start selling her cookies commercially. Bernice said yes before they finished the sentence. She launched a small business, Bernice's Best, selling her grandmother's oatmeal raisin and chocolate chip cookies at community events, farmers markets, and local stores. And the packaging featured a drawing of a cookie tin with a dish towel draped over it. The tagline read, "Made with love, never thrown away." That tagline was Yamisi's idea. Within 3 months, Bernice's Best was selling at 4 locations in Newark and 2 in East Orange. Bernice donated half of all profits to Meadowbrook Elementary's after-school program. When asked why she gave so much back to the school where she had been humiliated, Bernice gave an answer that made the local news anchor tear up on camera. "That school didn't hurt me," Bernice said. "One person hurt me. The school is the children, and the children are everything." And then, Mrs. Vega. Amalia Vega returned from surgery 8 weeks after the reveal. Her knee was healing. Physical therapy was going well. She walked with a slight limp, a real one, not a performance. But she walked with purpose, the way teachers walk when they know exactly where they're going. She arrived at Meadowbrook Elementary on a Tuesday morning. She had been told the classroom was updated, but she didn't know what that meant. She assumed maybe new textbooks, maybe a repaired window. The bar was low. After 12 years of teaching in underfunded schools, the bar was always low. She opened the door to room 14B, and she stopped. New desks, not the wobbly, scratched desks from 1997 that she had been submitting replacement requests for since 2015. Real desks, sturdy, adjustable. Each one with a small cubby underneath for backpacks. New chairs, with cushioned seats. The kind that don't make your back ache after 6 hours. A smart board mounted on the front wall, replacing the whiteboard that had been stained yellow for as long as anyone could remember. The smart board glowed softly, waiting to be used. New bookshelves along the east wall, stocked with chapter books. Bridge to Terabithia, Charlotte's Web, The One and Only Ivan, Brown Girl Dreaming, The Crossover. Over 200 titles, organized by reading level, each one chosen by a children's librarian Shaq had consulted. And in the back corner, the reading nook. 3 oversized beanbag chairs in deep blue, forest green, and warm gold. A soft rug underneath. A floor lamp with a warm bulb. A small wooden sign above it, hand-painted in a child's lettering, that read, "Mrs. Vega's Reading Corner." where stars come to shine. Yamisi had painted that sign. Shaq had asked her to. She had spent an entire Saturday on it. I'm choosing every color with care, painting every star with precision, dotting the eyes with tiny golden suns. Mrs. Vega stood in the doorway of her transformed classroom. Her hand gripped the doorframe. Her bad knee buckled slightly, and she caught herself. She walked to her new desk. She pulled out the new chair, an ergonomic chair with lumbar support, the kind that costs $300 and is worth every penny for a woman who stands and sits and kneels and bends for 7 hours a day. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the desk. She looked at the bookshelves, at the smartboard, at the beanbag chairs, at the rainbow on the door. Still there, still taped in place. One corner still slightly peeling despite Shaq's best effort with his giant thumb. And then she lowered her head to the desk and cried. Not the crying of pain, but not the crying of exhaustion. The crying of a woman who had given everything she had to a room full of children and had finally been given something back. Dr. Rosalind Grant, the new principal, stood in the hallway outside room 14B. She did not interrupt. She did not check her clipboard. She did not time the crying. She simply stood guard, making sure nobody disturbed this moment, making sure a teacher who had earned the right to weep could do so without judgment, without a clock, without anyone telling her to follow the textbook. That's what a real principal does. They stand guard for their people. And Deshawn Morley. 3 months after the reveal, Deshawn's drawings were featured in a youth art exhibit at the Newark Museum of Art on Washington Street. The museum, one of the largest in New Jersey, and with a permanent collection spanning centuries, had started a program showcasing young artists from Newark public schools. Deshawn was the youngest artist ever featured. Shaq attended the opening night. He wore a suit, a real one, tailored, no brown sweater, no fake glasses, no name tag. He walked into the museum as himself, and people recognized him immediately. Heads turned, phones came out, security tensed. But Shaq wasn't there to be recognized. He was there for one painting. He found it in the East Gallery, third wall from the entrance, eye level. The painting was 24 inches by 36 inches. Watercolor and graphite on thick cream-colored paper, the same paper from the sketchbooks Shaq had given him. It showed a man, a very tall man, kneeling on a tile floor, his arms wrapped around a small boy. The man's face was partially hidden. You could see the curve of his jaw, the width of his shoulders, the gentleness of his hands. The boy's face was buried in the man's chest. Around them, in a circle, other children reached in, arms overlapping, hands touching. The colors were soft, golds and browns and blues, the kind of colors that feel warm when you look at them, the kind of colors that make you want to step inside the painting and be held too. The title of the painting was The Door. Below it, on a small white card, in Deshawn's careful handwriting, were 3 words, "For Mr. Harrison." Shaq stood in front of that painting for a long time. People took photos of him from across the gallery. Reporters positioned themselves nearby, waiting for a statement. A woman from the Star-Ledger approached with a recorder and asked, "Shaq, what does this painting mean to you?" He didn't hear her. He was standing in front of a door painted by a 10-year-old boy who used to sleep in shelters and eat cereal without milk and draw pictures of escape on pages held together with tape. A boy who had been called lazy by a principal who didn't bother to ask why he was tired. A boy whose mother had written him a letter so full of love that it made a room of children weep. A boy who once drew a door on a blank page. a door standing alone, with no walls around it, light pouring through the cracks, and wrote underneath it, "Sometimes I wish I could draw a door and walk through it to somewhere else." He had walked through it, not alone, never alone. He walked through it with Yamisi's arm around his shoulder, with Marcus's hand on his back, with Teo's rough palm on top of his head, with Bernice's prayers in his ears, with Priya's patience in his classroom, with Mrs. Vega's rainbow on his door, with his mother's letter in his notebook, and with a 7'1" man from Newark who had knelt down on a cold tile floor and held him like he was the most precious thing in the world. Because he was. Shaq finally turned from the painting. He found Deshawn standing a few feet away, wearing new sneakers, no holes, and a clean blue jacket. His hair was freshly cut. His composition notebook was under his arm. Always under his arm. Some things you don't outgrow. Some things you carry with you, because they carried you first. Shaq walked to him. He didn't kneel this time. He stood at his full height, 7 feet 1 inch, and Deshawn stood at his full height, 4 feet 8 inches. Oh, and neither one of them felt taller or smaller than the other. "I'm proud of you, Deshawn." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." Shaq tilted his head. "You know my real name?" "I know," Deshawn said. "But you were Mr. Harrison first, and Mr. Harrison is the one who stayed." Shaq didn't have an answer for that. Some sentences are so complete that any response would only make them smaller. They stood together in the gallery, side by side, looking at the painting. The tall man and the small boy. The basketball player and the artist. Two people from Newark who had both, in their own way, drawn doors on blank pages and dared to walk through them. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart. Through the museum windows, you could see the Newark skyline, the real one, not the drawing, lit up against the evening sky. Every window glowing a different color, just like Deshawn had imagined. Amber and blue and pale green and soft pink. Thousands of windows. Thousands of lives. Each one carrying something. Each one deserving to be seen. Shaq thought about a cold Monday morning in January. A tight brown sweater. A hallway that smelled like floor cleaner and crayons. A girl named Yamisi, who was brave enough to speak up when everyone else was silent. A boy named Deshawn, who drew doors to places he'd never been. A janitor who bought flowers. A grandmother who baked cookies. A young teacher who refused to give up. A veteran teacher who loved her students more than her own body. And a principal who made the biggest mistake a person in power can make. She forgot that how you treat people when nobody important is watching is who you really are. But she forgot that cruelty doesn't become invisible just because the person you're cruel to doesn't have a platform. She forgot that the people she dismissed, the substitute, the janitor, the lunch aide, the teaching assistant, the children, were not invisible. They were not small. They were not nothing. They were everything. And somebody important was always watching. Sometimes he's 7 feet 1. But sometimes, and this is the part that matters most, sometimes she's 10 years old with 2 braids and a brave heart. Sometimes he's a quiet boy with a pencil and a dream. Sometimes she's a grandmother with a tin of cookies and a 100-year-old recipe. Sometimes he's a man with a mop and a jar of yellow daisies. Sometimes she's a young woman with a folder full of hope. The important people are everywhere. They're in every hallway, every classroom, every bus stop, every shelter, every kitchen, every heart that has ever been made to feel small. They are watching, and they will be seen. And that is why how you treat people matters. Every single time. because you never know who is watching. And you never know whose life you can change with a little bit of kindness. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching this from. Whether you are in Newark, New Jersey, or halfway across the world. I want to know. Because this story proves that kindness has no zip code. If this video made you feel something, if Deshaun's story touched your heart, if Yamisi's bravery gave you chills, if Bernice's cookies made you smile, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Not for me. For every substitute teacher who gets disrespected. And for every janitor who buys flowers with his own money. For every kid who draws doors to places they have never been. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Subscribe right now and turn on that notification bell. Because we tell stories like this every single week. Stories about real people, real kindness, real moments that remind you that being good to people is never a mistake. Now click on the video that is appearing on your screen right now. Trust me, you do not want to miss it. I will see you in the next one.